We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell.
Hello and welcome back to the AJ Bell Money Matters podcast. I'm Laura and I'm joined as ever by Danni. Hey Danni.
Hi Laura, hi everyone. We're back to normal in this episode following our hopefully uplifting International Women's Day special, discussing all things money that can help you become financially fitter.
And of course, a lot of what we talk about on the podcast and with our wider content is aimed at women. It's created for women by women, but there's also value in a lot of this stuff for everyone. And this podcast is no different.
Because this podcast episode is all about planning, yes, for the future, but for the bit of our future that no one really likes to talk about, but it is so vitally important. It's when we die.
Which I know already sounds depressing, but don't turn off because there's some vitally important stuff in here that I know is not exciting and not uplifting necessarily to talk about, but it is really important because there's a lot of paperwork involved when that your loved ones will have to contend with when you die. Things like making sure that your wishes are followed, making sure that what you want for your family is carried out, and that's why you should all have a will.
And yes, that is you and the person next to you and the person who sat next to you on the bus this morning and your partner and your friends. Everybody should have a will. And yet every year we have research that comes out and shines a light on how many people don't have a will. In fact, around half of all adults haven't got to grips with that task.
And I know definitely when I talk to my friends that half of all adults figure is definitely accurate when I think about that group of people. A lot of them, have houses, have kids, but have just not quite got around to getting that will done. So we're going to drill down into some of the reasons why that might be, why people put it off, but also why you should really get it sorted. And since the month of March is Free Wills Month, which means if you're over the age of 55, you can get a free will, we thought it was perfect timing to talk about some of those misconceptions that are out there, talk about some of those reasons why you might need a will and why you might be putting it off. So with that in mind, let's introduce our guest for the episode, Olivia Bowen. Hi, Olivia.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Very welcome. We're hoping to learn a lot from you today. No pressure. So Olivia is a partner at Castlefield, which is an investment management and financial planning business. But let's start, I think, with the kind of obvious thing that might seem like a silly question, but in this podcast, there is no such thing as a silly question. But why should someone have a will?
I think the main reason is it encourages you to have those difficult decisions and difficult conversations. And I think when you were doing the intro, so many people, it really resonated with me because so many people find it morbid. And I'm really lucky because I talk about this stuff all the time through work. So I don't find it an issue. But lots of people don't want to address, their eventual demise. But actually, those I've spoken to who do, and our clients who largely do, because we encourage them to do so, find it really empowering. So it focuses the mind. It makes you talk about what's next for the rest of the family. And there are really practical things as well that I can go into later.
And so I think full disclosure here, I was one of those people that didn't have a will for a very long time. And I think it was only really after I had my daughter that it made me think, right, this is something that I definitely need to get sorted. I put it top of my to-do list and actually was very surprised at how quick the process was. But I think before that, I'd thought, well, there's not maybe so much need. There's not a pressing need for me to have this. And I think a lot of people out there listening to this might be of the same opinion. So they don't have a huge amount of money, or maybe they don't have kids, which makes them think that they don't need a will. So is that true?
No, I think everyone should have a will. Absolutely. Because it's not about how much money you've got, but it's about protecting your loved ones, and that it may not be your offspring, it may be your sibling. It's about making sure that your wishes are known. It's a bit about making sure that the right people get, the amounts that you want them to, even if there's very little there. Say you die with £10,000, that's still a meaningful amount of money that can go to, somebody. So also one thing to bear in mind is if you're not married or in a civil partnership, but you're in a really long-term relationship, they are not protected. So if you die intestate, which means without a will, then there are certain rules that apply, and you effectively, those rules will apply if there is no will. And so if there's spouses and civil partners are protected in some ways, and children, but long-term partners aren't. And there's a whole inheritance tax issue around that also.
Because I think a lot of people do assume that loved ones will just automatically inherit their wealth when they die, that, it'll all be all right, and that their kids or their husband will just get on with it and everyone will be happy. And that's not the case.
No, absolutely. Particularly in blended families, it can get pretty complicated. So how it works if you die intestate, so without a will, is the first £322,000 will go to your spouse or civil partner if you have one. And then any surplus over that is shared 50-50 between the spouse and any children. But stepchildren aren't included in that. And if your house is what your share of the house, say when you die, is worth more than 322,000, then in theory, depending on how you own the house, and it gets a bit complicated, but in theory, your children could end up owning part of your spouse's house. Now, if you all get on great and it's no problem, that's okay. However, they'll just go, look, we'll get it when mum or dad dies. But if there are any issues around that, or say mum's left, mum wants to, downsize and sell up and buy somewhere else, the kids could have a say, will say, well, can I have our money? Can we have our money now? And that may not be affordable for her, or it could cause a lot of tension. So it's so much better to do the difficult, what can be emotionally difficult work, while you're alive, rather than leaving it messy when you're gone.
And there's probably never a right or a wrong time. But Laura said earlier that it was after she had her daughter that she thought, right, now it's time, I need to get a will. And it was the same thing for me. I had my second child and I'm like, oh, okay. I really need to get things in order, particularly because I wanted to make sure that if something happened to my husband and I, that my kids would be looked after and I would have a say in who would look after them as well. And is there a right or wrong time? When do people choose usually to go for a will?
Yes, I'm the same as well. I was a bit ahead of you guys. It was when I was pregnant with my first child. I thought, right, yes, we do need a will here, and so we tootled off the local solicitor. I think, so pregnancy, the birth of a child, adoption, of course, marriage also. And if you've already got a will, this isn't that widely known, but if a marriage revokes a will. So if you get married, you need a will because your previous will may well be invalid. Moving abroad. So if you decide to move abroad at any point in your life, depending on the country you move to, your UK will might still be valid in some way for your UK assets. However, it will not apply to the country that you move to. So you're going to have to get a will. We should get a will in that country also.
And I think to that point that we talked about there of kind of having kids and that being a prompt for it, but also wanting a say in who looks after your kids if you were to die, if both you and your partner were to die. There is a flip side of that. So one of my friends has this conundrum of she really wants to write a will. She knows that she should write it, but the key question that her and her husband can't answer is who should be the guardian for the kids if they were both to die. And so therefore they've just not written a will because they can't kind of get over that hurdle or come to a conclusion on that. So is there a way, I don't know, I guess, is that a common issue, and how would you overcome it?
I'm so glad you raised that, Laura, because that happens all the time. And what I've discovered, so with the caveat that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not the one writing the wills, but obviously we discuss this with clients all the time. What you can do is you can write a will without that, and then that can follow as a separate document. And one of my thoughts when I was preparing for today was to try and get the message across that something's better than nothing. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just crack on and keep it as simple as possible. So there's a format, which, well, it's not even a format. There's the structure called a letter of wishes, which can accompany a will. So your will is your legal document that needs to be, I mean, I would say as simple as possible, unless your circumstances really are complicated. But that's the thing that can, is legally binding. But then the letter of wishes can be, a scrap of paper that you've written on and signed at the bottom that you can update it at any time, saying, the guardianship would ideally be for children would be a proper document that a lawyer's drawn up for you. But you could, in theory, say, my preference would be that the children were looked after by our mother or whatever, but my mother, but if she's too infirm by the time, if something happens, then I would rather so-and-so's brother took them or whatever. That at least somebody then knows what you were thinking. And things like that can go in a letter of wishes is if you're leaving money to charities in your will, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a moment, then you can actually list the actual charities that you want to leave the money to in a letter of wishes, because that may well change over time. And then you're not having to keep rewriting your will, particularly if it involves the cost of a solicitor. So I think the will itself should be as simple as it can be, but there are other ways to make your wishes known that are not legally binding, but unless people are really having a big argument or whatever after you're gone, they'll probably do a good enough job, one would hope.
And so how long does the whole process take? Because I'd imagine that's something else that puts people off, is thinking, I know I should do it, but I think it's just going to take ages. And I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by how relatively simple, once you've had some of those trickier discussions, by how relatively quick it was.
Did you see a lawyer, Laura? Did you go and see a solicitor?
No, I did it virtually. So we had a kind of, I think it might have been a Zoom meeting or maybe even an old-fashioned phone call where we discussed the things, and then we had a questionnaire of kind of all of the questions that you'd likely need to answer, and then it went from there. So it's actually, I think that also cut down on the time needed, right? Because you're not having to find childcare so you can go to a solicitor's office or...
Yeah, exactly. And we're all doing these Zoom things nowadays, aren't we? And it's I'm showing my age there. Zoom. But it does. Yeah, you don't have to meet your lawyer if you do go to a solicitor. There are. I think best practice is to go and make sure someone's made sure you've thought of everything and got it witnessed properly. However, I do have a personal anecdote to share, which is my sister doesn't have children and has got some assets. And doesn't have a partner. So if she died intestate, then the money would go to our dad sadly passed away, but our mum. So that was always fine. And then the idea we sort of say, oh well, mum will probably will give it to me for all my kids. And now as mum's getting older, I just had a chat with my sister at Christmas and went, actually, Kate, if mum's in a position where we're acting as attorneys for her, and then you die, and then the money goes to her, I can't get at it because I can't take money off a vulnerable person that I'm looking after. As soon as somebody acts as your attorney, you can't start getting money. They can't give you loads of money. Even if they want to, really, you have to be careful as an attorney that you're acting properly, and protecting their interests. So taking a load of money off them wouldn't be the right thing to do. Also, if it goes that way, it might pay inheritance tax on my sister's death, and then inheritance tax on mum's death also, maybe in quick succession, which is obviously, not ideal for our purposes. So we went along to the local post office and I got a will pack that cost, I think, less than £10. And it just said all my estate, to whom, and she left it to me, bless her. and told me that if I could afford to, she'd like the children to get it, but that was my decision. And then she signed it and got it witnessed by someone who's not part of her financial setup or any beneficiary of the will. So you can't have another family member or close family member who to witness. It's better being a neighbour or someone. So we got it sorted. So that took less than an hour, I would say, all round. So you can, because her affairs are simple, boom, done. We've done that. It's better than nothing.
Yeah, I definitely think. I think that's probably quite encouraging.
Yes, exactly. But it can take weeks if you have complex affairs and you need to do a lot of toing and froing with a lawyer, of course. But for most people, there'd be maybe one initial chat, as you say, maybe online, and then the lawyer will draw up the draft of the will, and then you can check it through with yourselves, and then sign it. Done. Needn't take long.
And so what kind of information do you think that people need to have ready? Presumably you need to know a rough idea of like how many assets you have, what the total value of your estate.
Not well. If you're going to see a lawyer, I think they'd want to know, because they'd need to know the rough financial makeup of your estate so that they could make sure they hadn't missed anything. But on my sister's thing, there was no mention of the assets. It was just anything that's left on my death goes to this person. So you don't actually have to do that. But I think you need to know who you're going to ask to do your witnessing. You need to have thought about who you'd like your executor to be. So that's the person who actually carries out the wishes of your will. Normally it's a beneficiary, but it doesn't have to be. So say all your money's going to your children, but you might have a dear friend as an executor. Ideally, they should be younger than you, of course, and in good health. But you want to pick who your executor is. You want to, of course, know who you want your beneficiaries to be. That's fairly easy for most people. If you want to make specific gifts of certain things, you could include that. However, again, that if it's chattels, items of, physical items, you could again do that in the letter of wishes, although then it's not, as I said, legally binding. You might, some wills will ask for your funeral wishes and that sort of thing. But again, whether you want to be cremated or buried, but it doesn't have to include that. So if that's holding you back, ignore it and crack on.
I was going to ask you what should be included in a will, but I think you've covered most of the things off. Is there anything extra that we haven't thought about?
I think probably there's one thing I wanted to mention before I forget, which is for everybody's pension as well, you will have a death benefit nomination, also called an expression of wishes. And it's important to make sure that's completed, whether it's a defined benefit scheme or just your own personal pension. You're effectively telling the pension trustees who you want to get the money. So again, I put my sister down until I had kids, and then I realized my husband probably need the money, so then I changed it to him. But you can put anyone down. It doesn't have to be a family member. Because the inheritance tax rules or pensions from next tax year are going to start to be included in estates for inheritance tax, that might complicate things. People should review who they're leaving their pension to. For example, if you have maybe a farming family and one of the children is running the farm, so they're getting the farm, they're inheriting the farm, and there might be another child who's separate from that, and maybe they're getting the pension. And when you did your maths and it kind of felt fair, that may be under the current regime, whereas as the regime is changing, that person getting the pension is going to that's going to be subject to inheritance tax in some way. And so they will receive less. There may be nothing you can do about that, but it's worth everybody being aware that what feels fair now from next tax year might not in relation to who's getting your pension. So that's just something I wanted to mention.
That's really good to know, because I think people just carry on in life and they take out a pension and they don't think about making sure that all the boxes are checked and all the information is up to date. And I guess if you're having conversations with your family about your will, about your wishes, whether it's in a letter of wishes or the actual legal documentation, maybe that then sparks thoughts that you will then go back and make sure things are up to date? And should people tell their families? Does that make things easier when they have to deal with it?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it depends on the family dynamics, doesn't it? I mean, of course, best practice is sit down, people getting squeamish about it, tell them, it's important to have these discussions, and that if you're the people writing the will, you want to have these discussions, and that you want everything to be fair. I think it's much healthier that way. I think it saves misunderstandings. It saves potential emotional hurt. If you've got children with very different in very different financial situations, and you want to favor one over the other, it can be quite hurtful to the more affluent child potentially, because they can feel it's not you see, as my job's so interesting, because money isn't really just about money, is it? It's what it does for people and people, what it means for your lifestyle. It's not an end in itself, or shouldn't be. It's a means to an end. And I think people consider the will very much as a sort of last testament, isn't it? It's like, who was I thinking of? Who do I want to protect? Who am I, caring for? And if you're left out of a will because it's perceived you've got enough money, and you may well have, that can actually feel quite hurtful. If you know it's coming and you've had that conversation and you understand the rationale, you're not going to resent your siblings necessarily as much. If you understand your parents are doing it from a place of love, and then maybe they can leave you something nice that's very personal, that maybe doesn't have a financial value, but you get something. But I don't think a lot of families won't have that emotional engagement to go down that route. And it's easy with hindsight, I think, and as well, me seeing other, clients go through things, it's easy to sort of be wise after the event, But I think, of course, the message should be try and have, joyful conversations even about, if there's any money left, what would you do with it? If you can't afford to give in your lifetime to your family, which is the best thing to do, really. But if you can't afford to do that, then, try and make it fun, I guess, and, aspirational for everybody. That won't necessarily work. But a caveat is it's extremely costly, both financially and emotionally, to contest a will. So you don't want to leave families, particularly in blended situations, who've maybe got along fine, suddenly in a position where there's resentment, distrust, concern, people feel favoured over others. And you can avoid that if you do sensible planning. A note about that is lots of families do mirror wills, but if you do a mirror will, that can be changed. So say you die first, it's blended family, stepchildren, all that. You die first, your surviving spouse can change their will to whatever they want, and they could just change it to favour their children and not yours. And it may not be, deceitful or Machiavellian or anything like that. It's just people's natures just protects their own more. So if you want to make sure that it's fair when if you die first, then there are things called mutual wills, which can't then be changed. So that can be a, collaborative decision whilst you're both alive that gives some, security to more complex family situations.
And what about if you're out there and you listening to this and you've got your will sorted, but it was a very long time ago? How often do you think it needs updating? Because I can see some obvious situations that might prompt it. You have kids or a spouse dies or things like that. But is it something that you should regularly update anyway?
I think if something fundamentally changes within your family, absolutely. Otherwise, you'd hope it's fit for purpose. However, there are tax and legislative changes that may well affect your will depending on how you structured it. So one thing that happened, it's quite old now, but with the introduction of the residential nil rate band, which is where people can pass on another 175,000 tax-free to their children on debt. It's part of the inheritance tax planning. So everybody has 325,000, and then if you pass your home to your children or adopted children, then you get another 175,000 each. So a married couple or civil partner can basically pass £1 million if part of that is your home to your children without any inheritance tax. So clearly that's really valuable. But but you have to pass your home to your children. If it's written into your will that your home or part of it will go into a trust, then they might not qualify, or your estate might not qualify for the residential nil rate ban. Now, it depends on the type of the trust. Obviously, then you need legal advice. But that's a bit of a pitfall for older wills, because it used to be that you wouldn't inherit your spouse's nil rate band of 325,000. So what was happening is wealthier families that were more likely to go and sit in front of a lawyer and have financial advice and all that knew that and structured their wills to make sure that it was written in the will that the nil rate band was going to be passed from one to another, because that's how you organised it. So they were getting better tax relief than families who weren't getting that sort of advice. And I think it was the new Labour government, I think it might have been, under Tony Blair, who realised that this wasn't fair. And so just wrote it into law that even if you don't have a will, in theory, you still get your nil rate band transferred between spouses. It happens automatically. It's so you don't need that clause in your will anymore to pass that 325,000 into a trust. That's what it used to be, into a trust, in order to secure it for your future children if you were the first to die. And it's that trust now that might catch some people out, because it might then affect the residential nil rate band. Sorry, that's quite a long answer.
No, I think it's really useful stuff. But we said at the start that March is Free Wills Month, and that actually happens twice a year. It means that people over the age of 55 can get a will written for free. So can anyone who falls into that age category use it, or are there certain cases where that might not work?
Yeah, in theory, but I think I wouldn't use it as an excuse to delay, because I have had a few clients say, I'll wait till Free Wills Month. And that may be nearly a year away, and really they should crack on. You can't really choose your solicitor as well. So it's a bit more like you sort of apply to get this free service. So there's not a huge amount of control there, and you're a bit in their hands. So if they're a bit slow to come back to you, because they're doing it pro bono largely. So then, people, we are who we are. It's nice for them to do it, of course, but they might not be super motivated to be really efficient with those pro bono cases. So it might get a bit, sketchy. And then if you've got a complex case, I would say no, don't do that. Just, pick someone who's got the expertise to help you. I mean, they may well have, but it's potluck.
Yeah, no, understood. And so if you weren't going to use that kind of Free Wills Month, then how much roughly do you think it would cost? Obviously, it will vary depending on who you use and maybe around the country, but a kind of ballpark figure.
I reckon you're probably looking at about 300 quid for a fairly straightforward will, I reckon. But of course, yes, I'm sure there may be solicitors get in touch if they listen to this saying, no, we're far more expensive. But if it's quite a convoluted process, you will pay for that. So I've had clients who spend, a few thousand quid getting it sorted, but it only if the time is required. It's long, yeah.
And I know you spoke earlier about inheritance tax, and that is something which gets a lot of people really hot under the collar. The thought of having to, their kids having to pay inheritance tax when they die. And if you have a will, presumably that can help you pay less inheritance tax, or possibly avoid it entirely.
Yes. So, I mean, I think if you've got enough money, you're paying inheritance tax, then it's a fortunate position to be in, because lots of people in the country, of course, won't. But more and more of us are going to, because of house prices being so extortionate. And also the tax bands haven't gone up for years and years, but of course asset prices are generally going up over time. I think one of the key things people can do, so you can structure things in trusts and all that sort of stuff, but in theory, although wills are estate planning tools in a sense, um, and you can do certain sort of tax tweaking within them. But really, I would say one of the more valuable things you can do for yourself and society is to leave 10% of your net estate to charities in your will. And there's a calculation you can do, say, what's a net estate? And it's like, well, once you've taken certain things off. So broadly, 10% of your assets could go to charity. And that would reduce the 40% inheritance tax to 36%. And actually, when you run the figures, because it's coming off your taxable estate effectively, so it's only really worth doing if your estate's going to be worth over £1 million, of course. But when you actually look at the figures, because there's a reduction in inheritance tax, you might find that you're giving, say, 150 grand to charity, but your kids are only getting 30 grand less between them. So, and again, you could discuss that as a family, couldn't you? Say, this would be quite a nice thing to do. What do you guys think? And that's a nice way of discussing finances within a family, which often we don't do. And then I was thinking it would be really nice. You could say you could leave that charitable money, rather than saying exactly which charities it should go to, although you might want to. You could leave it to a donor advised fund. We use the charity service here in Manchester, or a CAF, of course, have these sorts of accounts. You could leave it to a charitable account, and then it would just sit there. And then your family could decide where it goes, or where some of it goes. And then their grieving process, they could sit around and discuss you and what you liked, and where you might have wanted, what you might have wanted to support. And I thought when my dad died, I thought that would have been really nice if you'd thought of that. That would have been quite sweet to sort of all get together and give to charities we thought he might have liked. That's one key tax planning thing you can do. It also makes the whole will process a bit nicer to talk about.
That's it, isn't it? I mean, having these conversations can be incredibly difficult, and if you can find a way to find the joy, to remember things about people that they loved, that can just help with the process. But there is something that I've heard about a lot, which is not to wait until you die in order to give away money, particularly if you're trying to deal with some tax issues. I've heard the phrase giving while living. What's all that about?
Yes, absolutely. So it really comes down to affordability. And as a financial planner, of course, Castlefield can help with that. We often help people work out how much is enough. Now, how much do I actually need? And of course, many of us are holding on to more money than we might actually need because of the dreaded care costs. And that is a very real concern for people. And of course, that needs to be factored in. But if it's affordable, there's such pleasure in giving to family, friends, or charities while you're still alive and can see them benefit from it. Otherwise, they're potentially waiting decades, and then you don't never get to see the benefits either. And as we know, environmental charities, social justice charities, they all need money now. So and of course, being able to give to your grandchildren or your friends who are in need or want to get on the housing ladder, whatever it is, help them come out of university without extortionate fees attached. That can be really, really valuable for people and make them feel really good about their wealth.
And of course, there's that 7-year thing as well, isn't it? When it comes to inheritance tax, that you need to live 7 years after you've given a gift in order for it not to be an issue. But there is a sliding scale there.
Yes, Danny, exactly. So you can give as much as you want in your lifetime, absolutely. But if you die within 7 years, if it's a potentially exempt transfer, it's called. So it's potentially exempt from inheritance tax if you live long enough. If you are making gifts to to trusts, certain sorts of trusts, you need to be careful, because then the 7-year rule can actually go back to 14 years if depending on the timing of the gift to trust and the outright gift to the pet. So it can get complicated. So just a caveat there to take advice if you're planning some serious giving. Effectively, the amount of the gift will reduce your nil rate band. So, if you give so your nil rate band 325,000, if you give 100 grand away and then drop dead, then effectively your nil rate band will be 225 at that point. But it is tapered, so after year 3 it starts to reduce. So it's still valuable, but yeah, the younger you can give away and while you're still in good health, is great. If you give to charity, there's no impact on your tax position or your estate. It's just out of your estate, gone. No tax will be paid on that.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And I should just let people know that you can find out information on the government website on writing and also storing a will. Plus, you can get some free advice and a free will writing service from the probate office. Also, there's quite a few charities, so like the British Heart Foundation, that offer a free will writing service year round. And you're not actually obliged to leave them anything in return, although I'm sure they're hoping that you might do. But like Olivia said earlier on, if you've got a more complicated estate, more complicated circumstances, some of those free or kind of simple offerings might not be an option for you.
Olivia, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Olivia Bowen at Castlefield, and we've got a fantastic website that talks all about our ethical screening policy and, where we invest and how we invest, and our financial planning team. So that's just castlefield.com. So thank you. It's been lovely talking to you both.
Yeah, thank you for taking us through all of that and diving into all of the little nooks and crannies of why you need a will. And hopefully we've inspired listeners to just crack on with it and not see it as this big daunting task. Like Olivia says, it doesn't need to take a huge amount of time.
So what are you waiting for? Because we've come to the end of the pod. So if you think that your friends, family, casual acquaintances could benefit from taking a listen to this episode and many other episodes before, do give them a nudge. We love it when people like and subscribe wherever they listen to their podcasts.
And of course, let us know if there's any topics that you want us to discuss or dive into on the podcast, or as an article on the AJ Bell Women in Investing Hub, which is the new home for all of our Money Matters content. And as always, you can find us on social media. We are at AJ Bell Money Matters on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
And we have some tickets to give away to the Affordable Art Fair being held in London in May. So do make sure you sign up to our newsletter. And why wouldn't you? You can do that also on the Women and Investing Hub. But until next time, thanks so much for listening.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.